Welcome to today's lesson on energy transfer, storage, dissipation, and the principle of conservation of energy. In today's lesson, we will firstly understand the principle of conservation of energy. Then we will understand how energy can change from one form to another. Finally, we will apply the principle of conservation of energy to examples to illustrate how it operates in real-life scenarios. So far, you are familiar with the concepts of open and closed systems and the notions of useful and wasted energy. Those provide a solid foundation for today's lesson. Let's dive into the lesson. The principle of conservation of energy is a fundamental concept in physics. It states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred, stored, or dissipated. Let's take a look at this in more detail by reminding ourselves of some ideas we've already covered. First, recall that energy can be stored in various forms, such as chemical energy, like in batteries, gravitational potential energy, like objects at a height, or elastic potential energy, like in a compressed spring. We will cover these types in more detail later. Next, remember that energy can change from one form to another. For example, kinetic energy can change into gravitational potential energy. As mentioned in the previous lesson, not all energy transfers are useful. Often, some energy is lost or dissipated as heat, sound, or other less useful forms. However, the total amount of energy always remains the same. With this established, we can flesh out the principle of conservation of energy for both open and closed systems. In a closed system, no energy is transferred in or out of the system. The principle of conservation of energy can be directly observed because all energy changes are contained within the system. In an open system, energy can be transferred into or out of the system. While the total energy within the system might change, the principle of conservation of energy still applies when we consider both energy entering and leaving the system. Let's now look at some examples. Consider a torch. The torch's battery stores chemical energy. When the torch is switched on, the battery's chemical energy is converted to electrical energy, which is then usefully transferred to light energy. Additionally, the bulb heats up as some energy is transferred to heat. Since heat in this case is not a useful form of energy for lighting, we say the energy was dissipated as heat. Nonetheless, the total energy remains the same. It has just changed from chemical energy to light and heat energy. Let's now look at a more complicated example. Consider a child swinging on a swing. At the highest point of the swing, the child has maximum potential energy because they are the furthest from the ground. As the child swings downward, this potential energy is converted into kinetic energy, which reaches its maximum at the lowest point of the swing. As the child swings back upward, the kinetic energy is converted back into potential energy. Throughout this swinging motion, assuming no friction or air resistance, the total mechanical energy, the sum of potential and kinetic energy, remains constant. This demonstrates the conservation of energy in a closed system. Kinetic and gravitational potential energies will be elaborated on in a subsequent section, so don't worry if this material feels a little advanced. These examples help illustrate the core idea that energy can change forms, be stored in various states, and even lost or dissipated as less useful forms, like heat. However, it is never destroyed or created from nothing. In today's lesson, we delved into the principles of energy transfer, storage, and dissipation, as well as the conservation of energy principle. We discussed how energy can be transferred between different stores such as kinetic, thermal, chemical, and gravitational potential energy. We briefly revisited the concept of energy dissipation, where energy spreads out and is often transformed into less useful forms such as heat. Throughout the lesson, we emphasized the conservation of energy principle, which states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred or transformed. By examining practical examples, we highlighted how these principles apply to real-world situations. Watch the rest of the GCSE physics course at Sophos Education.